The other use I love for it is writing emails to people, especially tricky emails. You can kind of give it a prompt and say, how do I address a situation with a client who wants to change something in their contract that we're not going to change? And get kind of an idea for a diplomatic email. I've seen some really great ones come out of there. It can do a good job, or you could give it your draft of an email and say, make this sound a little bit nicer, make it sound more diplomatic. I've heard of people having a lot of success with that.
You're listening to the Venue RX podcast.
What is up, everyone? Jonathan here with the Venue RX, and on this channel, we are passionate about documenting and sharing best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues. And we have all sorts of different styles of shows that we do on this channel. We talk to real wedding venue owners where they get to share their experiences. We talk to industry professionals who are professionals in all different areas of business that you'll need to run a successful venue and run a successful event business overall. And that is one of the shows that we have for you today. I'm really honored and excited to talk to Andrea Shah. She's a copywriter for the event industry, really, overall. Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I'm so excited to be here and to talk about websites.
Well, this is going to be fun. I'm excited to dive into copy and dive into websites. And just before we were on and actually recording, we were talking about accessibility and some of the different dangers that you can get into with websites. Could you, before we really dive into kind of the meat of this podcast, could you give us a little bit of a background on who you are and how you got into this industry?
Sure. So I started out actually in the localization and translation industry, working on websites years ago when I had an office job, when people still had office jobs. And that's where I got started. I learned a lot about websites that way. It was a crash course in website design, in copywriting, in SEO, basically every element of a website. And I worked with some really big name brands, but like so many people, when I had a baby, I wasn't ready to go back to the office. And so I started a business, and I've been doing content writing and copywriting ever since. And just to draw a quick little line for anyone listening, in the website industry, we generally think of content writing as things like blogs or other elements, maybe downloads that get people, that provide information that kind of attract people to your website. You might share that information, they show up in search. Copy is more focused on selling. So the copy on your website is really focused on selling whatever product or service you have, getting people to click the button at the end of the day to make an inquiry or book a call. So that's just a quick little difference. And I've been doing that for about 7 years with a more recent focus on the events industry, working especially with people in the wedding industry.
Amazing. That was such a good clarification. Actually, I want to camp on that for a second. Content writing. So I think from a very kind of generic, basic level, people think about just writing their website. Putting up the words that they need to have on there. And then they're also thinking about the design and the pictures and the platform. Is it going to be on Wix or Squarespace, right? But let's dive in a little bit deeper to the difference between, you said content writing, like actually just writing like a paragraph, and then writing copy, which is what you just said was the words that actually sell.
The potatoes.
Okay.
The part that sells. So usually what I think of as your copy on your website is maybe your home page, your about page, any pages that you have that detail the packages you offer or the services, how to contact you. And then your content goes beyond that, and it is a blog. In particular, in this industry, it's a blog for most people. And that's often going to be what gets you found by people who are in earlier stages of the planning process. So your website copy may be found by someone who knows, say they want to get married in San Diego in a small wedding venue and they're already searching. But your blog entries may get you found by people who are earlier in the stages of planning their event, and they're Googling beachy wedding venues. They're Googling, how do I plan an intimate wedding for 15 people? Whatever it is that they're Googling, you create these articles around those topics. And then the idea is that they come in, they read the article and say, wow, this person really knows what they're talking about. Let's check out their venue and go from there. So it brings them to the selling piece of your website.
At what point do you think that someone needs to hire a copywriter versus someone who can just kind of put a website together for more of kind of the visual side of things? Is there ever, maybe I'll rephrase that question. Is there ever a reason to hire just a copywriter or a copywriter to augment the efforts of an existing web designer?
Yes, absolutely. I usually like to think of it in terms of how many leads you're getting. Do you have enough leads to run your business? Usually people who are thinking about hiring a copywriter aren't people who are struggling to get leads to their business. It's people who are perhaps they're getting too many leads and they want to filter out the leads that aren't a good fit for their business, but their website isn't clear about what they offer. Sometimes it's about getting higher paying leads, people who are more aligned with the sort of services you're offering and making sure that your website showcases those. And sometimes we can also use your website copy just to refine if you're getting leads that maybe can afford your services, but aren't a great fit ultimately for your packages. So a lot of times people hire a copywriter not necessarily to bring in more leads, but to really refine and fine tune the kind of leads they're getting. Because at the end of the day, emailing back and forth with people who aren't a good fit for your venue is going to eat up a lot of time. We want to make sure that the leads you get are leads that are really well suited to the business you're running.
And you've really totally read my mind. I was going to ask you to dive into that a little bit more. What's the real value behind hiring a copywriter for your website?
So there's a couple things. One, you get somebody else's eyes on your services and your packages and your unique special factors, that what makes your venue so unique. And sometimes it's really hard to see the forest for the trees. You're looking at your own venue, but it's hard to see your differentiators. So that copywriter comes in, they see your differentiators, they figure out what makes you guys so unique. And then they also make sure that everything is clear. Sometimes people don't like friction in the buying process. They don't want to have to sit and untangle something and figure out what you're trying to tell them. So we want to make sure your packages are clear, your services are clear, your location is clear. And then the other big selling point is they make you searchable. If you write your own copy and you're not familiar with search engine optimization, SEO as we call it, it's how to make sure your page is findable in Google. And there are elements of that relate to your copy. And a good copywriter will also say, okay, we know you're a wedding venue based in Oakland. Maybe you're a country club based in Oakland, California. Here's how we're going to get you found based around this keyword. And they'll organize the copy on your website so that it's search engine friendly.
That makes a lot of sense. I was also considering just the time that is spent.
Yes, obviously the time, just one fewer thing to do.
Totally. And then one other piece here is, when you're hiring a copywriter, this could be the difference between closing deals with clients that you want to work with, not just any client. And it also could be the difference of just maybe even getting those clients, because you said copywriters are typically hired not when you need leads, but when you need to refine leads. Was that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm never going to tell someone who is launching their venue, unless they have unlimited capital, to go out and hire a copywriter right away, because you also want to take the time to figure out who you want to work with. And sometimes that comes with experience, figuring out who's best for you, fine tuning your packages. All of that takes place in the first year or two, maybe a little bit longer of running your business. Then once you have a good handle on that, you're getting some good leads from word of mouth, maybe social media, you can come to us and you can say, I need some help. You can also come to a copywriter if you know people are finding your website, but for whatever reason, they're not going through to the next stage of inquiring with you. We can also kind of finesse that and say, okay, so you have a good number of hits on your website, but it's not clear what your packages are. So we can help you really refine that too.
And clarity of what the packages are, how much things cost. I think that's so important because we're so used to having the information like on our phones immediately. And so if there is friction, now you talked about friction, and Andrea, I'm wondering, is there ever a time for friction in the buying process? Like, would you ever want to use friction strategically to weed out the types of clients that you don't really want to work with somehow?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say you still want to make it as easy for someone to book as possible, which is kind of the job of the copywriter and the designer together. But you do want to make these points, you want to make it clear who you're for, and in doing so, you'll also make it clear who you're not for. So, for example, you might be a venue that does not allow outside caterers. Perhaps you have a caterer on site, and that is who people want to work with. I'm thinking of the beautiful art museum in my hometown, actually, that has, I think, 3 caterers they work with. And that's it, because it is all white on the interior, and they want people who are not going to make a mess out of that. So the person that they want to book is someone who's totally willing to work with that. If it's not clear on their website, the last thing they want is an influx of leads of people saying, okay, I've already been talking to such and such caterer. And then you have to say, okay, pump the brakes. They're not one of our approved vendors. No, you want to make it really clear from the beginning. These are the people that you can work with. If you choose us as your venue, these are the rules that are laid out. That's the sort of thing that your copy can take care of so that it saves you and them time and energy, because it's not just about your time and energy. It's also about making sure that people who inquire with you are going to be a good match and that they're not wasting their time talking to venues that aren't a good fit for them.
I have a little bit of a selfish question from the 5 venues that we manage. I've heard from our teams, and I've kind of seen this in action, that a lot of times it feels like clients that we're talking to, couples that we're talking to, may not be reading. They may not be reading where we put, like we'll say tours by appointment only, but we'll still have people show up, or whatever the case may be. And that's just a small example. But I can't help but think that maybe we're putting the copy in the wrong place. So do you have any kind of best practices or advice for people around where certain pieces of copy should be, maybe around instructions, around tours, or different stipulations of the venue, just like catering, like you were talking about?
You can put them in multiple places, and I don't think that hurts. Sometimes I think that we hold back on putting something in more than one place, but you have to remember, in particular, some people will read the homepage and not the rest of the website. So you want to make sure that critical information like that is on the homepage. It's maybe on the contact page for something like tours. And then again, for something like, say, the caterers, you'd want to make sure that it is on your website, but also in any downloads that you have, because I know a lot of times there's a PDF download people will have with more details. You want to make sure the critical information like that is available, and you can make sure that it's in bold. You can work with your designer to kind of pull it out as an element too, to make sure that it's really, really visible.
That makes a lot of sense. When we're thinking about copy in terms of being accessible both on phones, mobile devices, as well as laptops, computers, things like that, are there best practices, maybe even around some website design stuff, that help clearly communicate everything without loading a page full of text?
I would say bullet points are really, really useful. People love to read bullet points. That helps a lot. And then the other thing is break things into smaller paragraphs. You don't really want like one line per paragraph, but a lot of times when people write their own copy, it's big, chunky paragraphs, and people just skim right over those. The other thing you can do is use different font sizes to highlight like a headline and that sort of thing. So make it skimmable, for lack of a better word. Make it so that you've got a smaller headline, a paragraph, another small headline that indicates what they're reading, and a paragraph. And when you break it down that way, it's a little bit harder for them to miss key information, and it's also just easier for them to read. We've all gone on a website, seen a paragraph that's about 20 lines long, and clicked back because it just is too intimidating to read that big chunk of text.
So relatable. And it's even that, you'll see it and you'll be like, wow, there's a lot of stuff. And you'll just kind of, that's what you'll say in your head, and you'll keep going. I've actually even seen that with bullet points. Like, people put the bullet points in pretty small font, and it's just like, 15 or 16 bullet points. And even though it is important, you're maybe going to skim it and just say, request some more info. And then you're going to ask those questions that were answered in the bullet point.
Yes, exactly. So if you had 15 bullet points, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but if you had 15 bullet points, maybe break them down into 3 sets of 5 with a little headline to indicate, information about each one. Break them into categories and then split them up a little bit to make them more readable. Because again, 15 bullet points, that's going to be a lot. Some people are always going to be, and you can't get rid of the non-readers altogether. That's the other thing to keep in mind, is no matter how hard you try, you're going to get a few of those.
Absolutely. And that's where the repetition that you were talking about comes into play. If they don't see it on the page, hopefully they see it in the first email, or the communication that you have. That makes sense. Andrea, what do you typically do for your clients? Like if someone's going to hire you, what is, the majority of the work that you do for them comprised of?
So a huge part of copywriting is before we write a word of copy, we do a lot of research. And so generally, if I'm working with a venue, what I would do is one, sit down for a one-on-one conversation with the venue owner or whoever's managing it, maybe any other key team members as well, and try to get a sense of where their business has been, where they see it going, some of their differentiators, what makes them unique, and then also just who are the clients they're working with now and how does that differ from who they want to be booking, if it differs. Maybe the answer is just no, we're booking these people, but we're going to be raising our prices and we want to make sure we keep booking them. So that's part one. I also have them fill out a questionnaire along similar lines to give me a sense of who they are, where their venue is, really get into the minds of their ideal couples. And then if it's possible, I love to talk to one or two of their past couples before we proceed, just to understand where were you in your booking process when you found them? How did you find them? What made you book this venue? And ultimately, how was your experience? From there, I also love to read reviews. The more reviews you can give me of your venue, the happier I am as a writer, because oftentimes your clients will say really insightful things about your business that you wouldn't have phrased that way. And as a writer, we want to talk to your people in language that they'll recognize and they'll identify with. So a lot of times we're stealing lines from your best reviews because those people get to the heart of what they were looking for. And when we talk about our own businesses, we often get jargony and we're not using the language our ideal people do. So I'll do that. I also love to look at what other businesses, competitors, for lack of a better word, because I know we all like to collaborate, but what other people in your space are doing to see where we can really make your venue stand out. All that goes in before I write the copy. And then afterwards, I'll dig in and I'll write the copy. We'll also add in any SEO keywords that you're focused on. And then usually it's a process of going back and forth a little bit. I deliver the copy and my clients come back and say, okay, maybe here's a change we want to make. Here's some, alterations. But in general, we really want to do a ton of research before we write a word of copy.
That's so cool. And that's such great insight into your process. I'm curious, as far as collaborating, do you start like a Word document or is there some sort of like tool
Google
that you use?
Yes.
Okay, amazing.
Yes, that's what I usually do. If I'm working with someone's designer, I'll sometimes also give them ideas on the layout of the website, just, especially like if they've hired a designer to do some hand-drawn elements. I work regularly with one designer who's great at that. So if she and I were working on a venue site, I might say, okay, what if we did a hand-drawn map inspired by these little principles? So when we can collaborate with a designer, we might give more layout suggestions. Otherwise, I'll give my clients a Word document or a Google document, and then usually it has a few suggestions in there for how the designer would structure the copy as they worked on it.
That makes a lot of sense. This is really cool. And, as you were describing the process that you go through, I couldn't help but think, having someone, like you said in the beginning, that's so focused on just the copy piece, just the words that are meant to influence and inspire whatever you're doing, that's really powerful because that is, a lot of times driving the click to book a call or to fill out the form. I'm curious though, is it for you learning more about the venue itself and learning more about the venue through the lens of the couple, can that sometimes for you maybe creatively not feel as inspiring because you're kind of within a framework or network, or is that not really the case because you kind of have to be very, I don't know, for lack of a better term, not bullet pointed out, but I'm just thinking as a writer, you're creative, you're thinking about all these different things, and then it's like, well, venues, we've got 4 walls, maybe we've got some greenery, how do you kind of bring that creative element out to really make it stand out?
For me, it's all about the experience. So of course you have 4 walls. Of course you've got, all venues are going to be telling you about their culinary facilities and how many people they can accommodate. But at the end of the day, what clients are interested in the most is the experience. And that's where we really focus when we're writing copy, in particular for the event industry, is not so much on the particulars. Those are going to be there. Oftentimes for a venue, I see them in downloads, again, where it's very much spelled out that this ballroom holds this many people. These are the menus we offer. And that's fine. At the end of the day, people need to see that. But on the website, we want to inspire a little bit more of like a sensory memory, get them thinking, really picturing in their mind, okay, this is a special day for me. I'm going to have it at this venue. What's my experience going to be like? What happens when I book my inquiry? Whether it's a call or a visit to the venue, or they just send you a guide that explains it, we want them to see what their next step is. And we really want them to be picturing that experience and highlighting the things that make the experience a little bit different at your venue.
I love that. And you answered that really well. I think the way that I asked it maybe was kind of tricky, but I love that you were talking about experiences. Can you give us a bit of kind of the full experience working with you? Because you said you give there's that initial call, that initial kind of information gathering, and then you write. Can you kind of complete the cycle for us around what the experience is like working with you?
Sure. So I'll write, and usually I like to be in touch with my clients when I'm writing. It's not that I require them to be absolutely bound to their desk, but I do like to be in touch because things will come up. What do you do in this situation? I mean, especially with a venue, if I'm writing a frequently asked questions section, sometimes I'll have to say, I had this question and I think I need the answer from you. But I will do most of the writing. And then what I will generally do is, like I said, I deliver a Google Doc with some layout. And usually I offer my clients the chance to revise the copy. And then they also get to just stay in touch with me via email or voice memos for a while to answer any questions. And if they do book a designer or are laying out the site and they want to come back to me with questions, I'm always happy to chat with them. Oftentimes clients will then come back later on to add some things. We can do emails that go out to people when they're interested in the booking process. We can add new service pages. So sometimes the relationship doesn't end after we do the initial website. I'm available to help out with more writing as, their business evolves and they go on.
That's so cool. And to be able to kind of work hand in hand with you around some of the additional marketing collateral, emails, yes, text blasts, any sort of like written, yes, sort of thing. Yeah. That's really neat. So I've kind of told you I was going to ask you about this, and I'm dying to kind of get your perspective and your take on it. But what do you think, how do you think AI plays into copywriting and kind of overall designing a website? There's been so much speculation on it. So many people I think are nervous maybe, or like, oh, this is cool. There's kind of this cool factor, but what's your take on AI and its place in copywriting?
So I like to think of it as an assistant, not as a full-on writing tool. And the reason I don't like to use it really for writing, there's two reasons. One, I'm always very cognizant of how what I write affects SEO. And we don't yet understand fully how Google is ranking pages written with AI. So they might be dinging them on their back end. And until we have some more clarity on that, I don't think it's a great idea to use your website copy. The other thing is that the copyright issues, and that's copyright as in the lawyer stuff, not as in the copywriter stuff, are a little bit murky still. We don't know where all the content used to feed AI like ChatGPT, where it came from. So if it were to be found out that it was lifting most of its copy from another venue's website, say, and then spitting it back to you with a few changes, we don't know what the legality is around that. So I think in terms of saying, write me a services page, you don't want to do that. But what you can do is say, can you give me 10 ideas for blog posts that will interest people who are looking for a wedding venue in Portland, Oregon? Or you can say, what are some common concerns that people have when booking a wedding venue that I should address on my website? You could even use it if you have trouble writing your frequently asked questions section. It's a great way to drum up ideas for those questions. You'll still need to answer them yourself, but it'll give you some ideas. You can also use it in areas that don't affect your SEO, like your Instagram caption copy. If you have a little trouble writing that, you can get something. Generally, I would suggest for people, get an outline from ChatGPT or, for Instagram captions, you can have it write the whole thing and then edit it so it sounds more like you. And also that avoids the problem of 5 different venues all going in and doing that and all having the same caption copy. If they use the same prompt, it could happen. But you can use it as an assistant for things like that don't affect SEO. I like to use it for, like I said, generating frequently asked questions. I think it's a really valuable tool to kind of come up with questions, objections, concerns that your ideal clients might have, and then create copy and content around those.
I've really liked using AI for writing. around giving myself inspiration and kind of getting over some writer's block, because I'm not, I don't do copywriting all day. So if I do have to write something, sometimes it's easy to sit there and go, what am I going to write on right now? But just like you said, if you can use it to kind of spark yourself, give yourself some of those ideas and kind of get some of the wheels turning as far as the words, then you can go in and you can revise it and you can make it sound a little bit more like you.
I was going to say the other use I love for it is writing emails to people, especially tricky emails. You can kind of give it a prompt and say, how do I address a situation with a client who wants to change something in their contract that we're not going to change? And get kind of an idea for a diplomatic email. I've seen some really great ones come out of there. It can do a good job, or you can give it your draft of an email and say, make this sound a little bit nicer, make it sound more diplomatic. I've heard of people having a lot of success with that.
That's really cool. I've actually never heard that before. And I feel like that's totally brilliant, because then, you kind of can maybe find diplomatic ways, to use your term, on how to phrase stuff, which is tough. Yeah, especially when you feel like, maybe getting emotional because you're upset about something or someone's trying to push, the boundaries. And so, using an AI tool can kind of take out some of the emotion, just kind of.
The robot's not going to get emotional. It will be logical for you. Exactly.
Exactly. Very, very cool. A couple more questions before we wrap up today. As AI is kind of something that we're hearing about, are you, how do you consider kind of integrating it in part of your workflow, or have you thought about it at all? And I apologize, not just your workflow, but do you think that AI is going to have a place, regardless, because it's kind of like the Wild West, you're right. There's not much, legality around it. There's not much. I think even some of the larger platforms, Google and whatnot, are trying to figure it out, right? But do you feel like for copywriters, for website designers, things like that, do you feel like AI is going to have a permanent place, or is it kind of more of a fad that might, leave once there are maybe some restrictions and some kind of parameters that are put around it?
I think that's really kind of a TBD. It'll be interesting to see. I've been asking myself the same question. Will we be talking that much about ChatGPT in 2 years, or is it some tools that everyone's using them, and then all of a sudden, is it going to be I think about Canva, for example, that people use to design graphics for social media. And 5 or 6 years ago, it was kind of a niche product. Now it's everywhere. Which direction is ChatGPT going to head in, or similar products? I don't know. I do integrate it into my workflow occasionally, like I said, to brainstorm. I love it for giving me a bullet pointed list of ideas just to spark creativity. But for me right now, that's where it's at, is sparking creativity, maybe in a couple cases giving me a rough outline of something. It'll be really interesting to see where it goes, whether it can start to write better copy that's more fine-tuned and sounds more like an individual, because that's kind of where it's at right now, especially for some of my clients, say photographers, wedding planners. They care about their individual voice being projected in the copy, and AI is not there yet.
So true, so true. It's easy to input a prompt and just come up with something really generic sounding, but that's not what our industry is about. Totally.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are there any tools that you use, whether AI driven or not, that are maybe outside of ChatGPT, but tools that you're using on a daily basis to either help you write copy, help you edit, maybe even things like Grammarly? Are there tools that you're integrating in the workflow?
I have Grammarly enabled. Absolutely. This morning I was making typos left, right, and center, and I needed something to point them out to me. I don't use the pro version, although I hear really great things. It's customizable. But there are other tools, also language tool, pro writing aid. All of those are really good. I would recommend anyone who writes regularly for their business enable something like that just to help them. You can ignore some of the warnings if they aren't the style you write, but you want it to catch your typos and your extra spaces and what have you. What else do I use? Occasionally I'll run copy through something called Hemingway app, which kind of points out when you have long, murky sentences and helps you chop them up and shorten them a little bit. That can be really useful. And those are kind of the main ones I use on a regular basis right now. But I always have a spelling and grammar checker enabled. I can't live without it. Oh, and then there's one other thing I use. The one I use every single day is called One Look, and it's a thesaurus for coming up with synonyms for words you use regularly. And that one is pretty much permanently open in a tab in my browser.
One Look. Okay, very interesting.
Yes.
You know, I actually have heard of Hemingway. I was at a marketing convention and I heard them say that, you know, the best concepts are ones that can be delivered very simply. And it's because most people are kind of reading and listening at like a 3rd or 4th grade level. Maybe that was the grade level, but like it was very simple and actually surprised some of the people in the audience. And so the goal the speaker was making was just to say the goal is to like be simple. And if you can, the simpler that you can get something with, you know, and still being able to convey your message, the better it'll be. And so, yeah, they
Exactly.
They mentioned that. Very cool. Well, Andrea, thanks so much. I appreciate you coming on the show, talking about copy. I think as people start their venue, as people start their service for weddings or events, whether it's a DJ or caterer, whoever it might be, right? You want to attract more of your ideal clients. So we talk about that a lot, but copy is such a practical way to do that. So I appreciate you coming on and explaining. I want to ask you one last question to wrap this up though. What is your favorite part of your job, and then what's your least favorite? And let's start with the least favorite first, and then we'll end with the positive.
The least favorite part of my job, every time you sit down to a blank document, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. Even though I come in with research and that sort of thing, it's still unnerving at the end of the day because you kind of have to make magic out of a piece of white paper. And so that's always a little bit intimidating. My favorite part of my job is that I get to talk to really interesting, creative people who are coming up with all kinds of great experiences, and they're not just online. They are always doing something offline for people. So they're doing creative work, whether that's hosting an event or taking pictures or baking wedding cakes, whatever it is, they're creating something that really brings happiness to people and just special memories. And so it's really fun group of people to work with. I get to be a little artistic and I get to use my copywriting skills, and it's all in service of making people have a good time at the end of the day.
I love that. That's so cool. And this industry is so fun because of that. Like we get to play in a very creative space. You know, it's business, we get to make money, but we do get to take care of people and give them these really incredible experiences. So that resonates with me a lot. All right, well, thank you so much. If people want to contact you, they want to hire you, they want to ask you questions, maybe follow-up questions to something they heard on this episode, where is the best place to reach out to you?
My website is andreashah.com. You can always reach out to me there, or I'm always active on Instagram, and my username is andreashahcopy.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to talk, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you so much.